All right, good afternoon, everyone. Very excited to have a Timpano Talks Live about philanthropy, community, and the nonprofit sector. I am Melanie Schmidt with Timpano Consulting, and I work across sectors to facilitate progress by partnering with leaders to focus forward beyond business as usual. And this afternoon, I am delighted to be joined by two individuals who have a lot of experience, expertise, and a lot to say about philanthropy, community, and the nonprofit sector. So that is what we are going to do, is have conversation. With me today is Salli Martyniak, visionary of Community Reimagined, who has a career dedicated to driving resources that strengthen communities and advance equity. Also with me is Tony Shields, who is president and CEO of the Wisconsin Philanthropy Network, which is a statewide member organization dedicated to the profession and practice of philanthropy. And Tony will correct me if I've gotten any of that wrong.
So far, so good.
All right. So his background also spans sectors, and I am really looking forward to this conversation as we're going to just explore the evolution of philanthropy. What does it look like today? What has the pandemic done to affect it? And more importantly, how can we focus forward and think about the opportunities that are coming to all of us as a result of our reactions to COVID-19 and the way that it's upended everything. So we're just going to start out. You all can add anything to your story. This is an organic conversation, but we are going to start out with asking each of you, and Salli, will start with you because you are in my middle screen, and then we'll go to Tony. And just what is something that has inspired you as the world has reacted to COVID-19?
Seeing the little snippets of conversation, whether it's on Facebook or LinkedIn or wherever, talking about the fact that we can't return to the old normal, that whatever that old normal is, that we really do have to see something beyond that. And that's inspiring. I just want to take the time real quickly to read one quote by Arundhati Roy, and she is an Indian author and activist. It's actually at the bottom of my email, and I thought maybe we could use this too as a little bit of inspiration. Historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. This one is no different. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. We can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice and hatred, our avarice, our data banks and bad ideas, our dead rivers and smoky skies behind us. Or we can walk through lightly with little luggage, ready to imagine another world and ready to fight for it. So I needed to share that.
Here is to very little luggage. I like that. I love that imagery, and that message is even better. Tony, how about you? What has inspired you?
So we were just talking about it off air. I think one of the things that's inspired me the most is the ability for people to adapt, and the ability for people to be nimble, and the ability of people to kind of rethink how they do their work, how they approach their ability to have an impact, and how this COVID-19 pandemic has forced everyone to collaborate in different ways than they have in the past. And I think, and then finally, the fact that I know from our perspective, the state has gotten smaller. The state is now a place with due to technology, we can engage more people in conversations in different ways than we had in the past. And so I'm inspired by what I hope are going to be the great positive results that are going to come out of this as we forge through and prove how resilient we actually really are.
I like how you talk about too that the state has gotten smaller. I found it truly has been the world has been getting smaller too.
Absolutely.
Like I've been amazed in just the number of people when we reach out. I've reached out, having done these Timpano talks since mid-March, of people who I've always wanted to talk to, but I just hadn't asked them before. And just the generosity of people to respond and be in this and share their opinions and perspectives and be vulnerable has really just been inspiring and sort of soul warming, heartwarming.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Possible. Salli,
Absolutely.
you're processing.
Yeah. You think it's because we've also taken that stop? You know, I mean, we are working differently just by the very sake of working from home, you know, so we're being forced to look at relationships differently. We're being forced to look at how we conduct ourselves differently.
Mm-hmm. And in thinking about conducting ourselves differently, that's also part of what we're doing here. And I'm going to invite those who are watching us online right now as we're live streaming to be part of our conversation as well. Let us know your comments. What are you seeing? What are you inspired by? Share that with us and share that with each other, because that's also another component that I have loved seeing is the just sparks of curiosity that are out there and the learning communities that we're able to create. And, you know, my hope, I love ideas, but I love action even more when those ideas go into action. And so everyone who's a part of our broadcast today has that opportunity to take a lot of these ideas, contribute to them, and then do something with them. And part of doing something always is knowing, where are we situated in the landscape? I mean, one of the things that I'm continually advising people is to figure out right now, what does the landscape around you look like? Because as we've just talked about, it's different today than probably it was yesterday, let alone what it was when you might have put your plans in place. And so as you both have been looking out on the landscape, and Tony, we'll start with you and then go to Salli. You know, what do you see as the potential game changers for the nonprofit sector?
So I think the biggest game changer, and it kind of goes back to that piece of inspiration. And one of the things I've been really inspired about from a philanthropic perspective was the ability for the philanthropic community to engage and mobilize in ways that have been very different than what they've done in the past. So funding sources have historically made contributions to support nonprofit organizations programmatically in many instances. And that programmatic support obviously helps to contribute to the bottom line of those nonprofit organizations. But what we're seeing as a result of COVID is that many philanthropic interests have recalibrated how they fund and how they support organizations. So they've actually looked at those funded partners and said, you know, in the course of this unique time, this time that has a lot of uncertainty and a lot of uncertainty for the sustainability of nonprofit organizations, we're going to relook at how we're doing funding with you. And so they are saying to those nonprofit organizations that although we've given you or we've granted you dollars to support a program, we're going to relax those restrictions that we typically have, and we're going to give you the opportunity to utilize those funds to support your operations, to sustain your organizations on an ongoing basis. Other funders have done things like you look at some funders that have had very arduous processes for grantees to participate in their processes, and sometimes those processes can take a year or 18 months in some cases. And some of our funders in the philanthropic community of Wisconsin, and mirroring similar work nationwide, are looking at their processes and turning those 12-month, 18-month processes into 2 or 3 week intervals. And so that allows a nimbleness that is going to help source nonprofit organizations. And what will be interesting will be when we get to a phase of aftermath for COVID, what it's going to be like as we go forward. Will philanthropic interests continue these approaches, or will they, in some respects, kind of go back to business as usual? And I think that's a big conversation that's ongoing in the philanthropic sector right now. But it was that initial sourcing and those initial the initial action that Philanthropy took at the very beginning. I think that was really a bellwether for what we're seeing as a result of that. Only 100 days in, right? So it really hasn't been that long, but there have been a lot of great conversations that have happened through Philanthropy, and a lot of great opportunities for Philanthropy to come together and engage in ways that they haven't engaged before.
So, Tony, I have another question for you. So, really looking at what's also happening to the economy at the same time, is the fact that, everyone is predicting that, it's not going to return for 2 to 5 years, really. We already see businesses going out of business and so forth. So what do you see happening to philanthropy in terms of their own endowments? What keeps their doors open?
Yeah, so almost immediately we got calls from some of our member organizations saying that they're looking at their budgets, they're looking at their forecasting over the course of the next, at least over the course of the next year to 2 years, to try to get an understanding of where they are. A lot of our philanthropic friends have gone into absolute worst case scenario planning to say, here's what this is going to look like. Yes, there will be some effects as it relates to available dollars for funding projects. And it's going to force two major things are going to force the hand of how philanthropy does their partnering with nonprofit organizations. And the first one is going to be, available funds. So what is available, how those organizations are looking at their various streaming mechanisms for funding organizations and funding processes, and what those tough decisions are going to be with limited resources and with allocation of funds for direct or service areas of need that are of the most immediate needs. So hunger, housing, jobs, mental health. So what that's going to look like. And then the other side of the big decision process, and this was actually a conversation that took place earlier today. I was on a conference call. We hosted a conference call for a number of our friends in philanthropy around disaster philanthropy. We had some national experts come in and engage in that conversation. And one of the things that came out of that conversation, and one of the issues that our members are saying we want to have further discussion about, is the reality of nonprofit organizations who weren't able to sustain and are going to ultimately close or fall off. And what does that look like? And what are the decisions, the hard decisions that funders are going to have to make regarding sourcing those organizations, or when to stop sourcing those organizations? So it's a big piece of what's going to come down the pike, and that's going to be an aftermath conversation, a result conversation, and a next action. And as you said, Salli, this could be a 2, 3, 4 year conversation as we move forward in that space.
And, to that point too, one of the things I've also been thinking about is that we're also going to be encountering new problems. We think about how many people are going to be out of the workforce, how many young people are going to be out of it. And, it may take a while for those graduates to find their first job and so forth. And so, one of the things too, in terms of nonprofits as well as, philanthropy, is how do we also encourage those nonprofits and philanthropy to look at these problems differently,
yes,
and not to solve them in the same old way that we have in the past, because it's working quite well for us.
It really is an exercise in innovation, and it's an exercise in who can source new ways to solve problems that are happening, and what funders have the comfort level of sourcing those new and innovative ways. So it's a two-way street. I mean, when we're talking about the level of innovation and the ability to assume risk in your funding, the first 60 to 90 days of COVID, as I stand here right now, or as I sit here right now and engage in this conversation with you all, it's really rooted in comfort. It's rooted in relationships. It's rooted in long time friendships between grantor and grantee. And it's rooted in that, okay, we know this organization. We've worked with them in the past. We have a great relationship with the leadership. We know the people that they are serving and the work that we're affecting. We can tell the story for them. And we want to sustain those organizations. So that's really been the narrative over the course of this initial and early part of the work. What we need to look at now, or what everyone needs to look at next, is the innovation space of that, and the ability of organizations to assume that risk that comes with sourcing and looking at innovation, and asking ourselves the hard question, are we comfortable doing that? And I think that's going to be kind of the next iteration of where we are within the space.
When I think about that though, and I really, my concern is, well, one of my concerns is people say innovation and everyone means something different,
Right.
and all that goes along with language and definitions and what that means. But even if we look at that as a baseline definition of innovation as doing things differently for an intended impact, just kind of it's a new idea into action to do something in a different way. That takes a lot of thinking to get through that. It takes experimentation, it takes testing. And that's not something that a lot of organizations are set up to do.
Right.
And that there's a certain case that has to be made for innovation that needs to be funded in order for it to be done properly. But to get the funding, like it seems like there's this vicious circle that comes into play.
Right, because innovation is also it's rooted. Innovation by its sheer nature is rooted in failure, right? So
Right.
there's a level of failure that comes with the testing and the figuring out what you're going to do, and then it comes down to the level of digestibility of a funder to be able to say, I'm cool with that, or are they going to assume less risk? So the pandemic obviously is raising questions or bringing questions to the forefront that we've been wrestling with as a philanthropic organization, and helping our member organizations get to that place where they have a level of comfortableness with what innovation could potentially look like. But I think part of our challenge right now, and it's not necessarily a challenge. I guess challenge is a pretty stern word to just say that right now, many of our members are focused on sustaining these great organizations that they currently work with, that they have a level of great comfort and relationship with, and sustaining those organizations as we go forward.
Yeah.
So, that's the one thing, though, I want to go back to what Melanie said about innovation. Sometimes, too, when we look at, funding innovation or, that brand new idea, we also talk about, or we think about what is perfect, as opposed to, no, it's not going to be perfect. And maybe it's not about, getting all of the data right and everything else, and just go out and sometimes do things. And I feel like, that we spend so much time on the process and all of the other points that we just lose the concept of action, which is what you said in the beginning.
Well, I think that yeah, Salli, you're right on point on that. And I think that's part of the nonprofit's responsibility too. I remember several years ago, I was working for a nonprofit membership group, and we had got some funding from the Advancing Healthier Wisconsin Endowment, and it was they were dollars designed to help address violence in neighborhoods in Milwaukee. And as part of the conversation, I remember sitting with the principal investigator for the project and other stakeholders that were coming out of the Medical College of Wisconsin, that is where AHW is housed. And the principal investigator looked me in the eye and said, Tony, this project might fail. We might get to a point where we realize that the approaches that were taken, the best practices, the benchmarking that we did is not going to ultimately be a good fit. Or the right thing that we needed to do. So go back and talk to your partners and let them know, do their work the best that they can, work with a certain level of fidelity. And if the project fails, the most important thing that we want to understand is why it failed. That's what we want to really get to, an understanding of why something works or why something fails. I went back to my nonprofit partners and I literally got laughed out of the room. And the reason why I got laughed out of the room was because these are executive directors from nonprofit organizations that are predisposed to telling the good story. Whatever happens, we're going to tell you the good story. We're going to tell you what we think you want to hear, so that you'll keep funding us. And we had to reach a comfort level of a place where we were able to tell the real story around what was happening. And to be blunt, we didn't totally get there. I mean, there wasn't a trust level built up that we felt like we could tell the down and dirty story around what was happening. And forward fast to 2020 and the pandemic, we've got funders that are saying to their nonprofit partners, we need to know the real challenges that you're facing, as this pandemic is going on, we want to get a full understanding of the pain and the pressure and everything that you're going under, because we really want to know what's happening. And from a philanthropic perspective, it was the right thing to say, and it was a thing that was said with a great deal of transparency and a great deal of honesty. But I still wonder if a nonprofit organization, if a grantee is ultimately going to feel comfortable enough engaging in the bad story, engaging in the story that is not, we're not in a place where we're going to tell rosy stories right now. We're a nonprofit that's going to tell a rosy story. But is a nonprofit really going to feel comfortable delving deep and saying, what are the real challenges that we have? What is the not pretty about this? Where's the light shined on us around our own deficiencies? And how can we work that forward? So it's going to be an interesting kind of place we're all going to be in, because we're all saying the right things right now. But where does the honesty and transparency, where is that going to take us to be able to make the improvements that we need to make?
Well, and I think what you said, we're saying the right things, and we're letting the right things wash over us, but are we believing the right things when we're hearing them? Because I think that's a big ask for, and regardless of sector, but particularly within the nonprofit sector, where there has been that messaging to, tell the good story and, make things and focus on metrics and that sort of thing. But we have this really interesting opportunity with the pandemic here and navigating through that, because there is a certain amount of vulnerability and experimentation that was forced upon people and people chose to embrace. It's been just inspiring to see some of the true, at different scales and levels, but the innovation that's happening. And we have to be able to say we're doing this as a result of the pandemic. Like, say it, claim it. We're doing it, we're trying it out, catalog it. I've been promoting people actually make their pandemic work journals, where they're writing down the things that they're trying, what's working, what didn't work about it. Because we're not going to remember, and we're certainly not going to remember how things played out. I mean, I can't even remember what day of the week it is or what I did last week, let alone thinking about some brand new innovation that I'm doing for my organization, and how did it play out, and how can I tweak it going forward, as opposed to getting stuck in it because it works now.
Right. Well, I think the big challenge, the biggest challenge for a nonprofit organization, and in full candor, I mean, WPN is a nonprofit organization also. We rely on grant funding, and we rely on a lot of revenue streams that are rooted in engagement. And the question for any nonprofit organization is, what is the balance between looking at these innovative practices that are coming about, these new things that are happening within our orbit, and running those up against the reality of sustainability and just keeping the doors open. So if you're asking a nonprofit organization to be innovative, and what they're thinking about is how they sustain their organization and how do we make that work, it's a balancing act that I think we all have to appreciate, and let the nonprofits help us understand that. So as a philanthropic community, we need the nonprofits to help us understand what the real reality is, and what those, going back to those real challenges and what they are, and thinking about what those innovative ideas can be. But the balance between that and doing the regular work that you need to do in order to sustain your organization is a real balancing act that I would imagine is going to be a tough dynamic for any nonprofit organization that wants to do really good work.
Mm-hmm. So, that's the one thing I've been hearing, in terms of sustaining your organization. And my question is, and when I was leading a nonprofit, my question always was of nonprofits as well as of my own organization, is, should we be sustained?
Mm-hmm.
Are you still relevant as an organization? Are you still meeting the mission that you said you were? And if you have already done that, is that mission relevant today? I just think that nonprofits should be asking tougher questions of themselves. Mm-hmm. And what does that look like? Because I see that there's going, just from reading and talking to organizations and boards and so forth, sitting on a few boards, is the fact that there's going to be a big upheaval, I believe, in the nonprofit sector in the next couple of years. And what that looks like is dependent on good leadership, both from executive directors as well as the board, and involvement from the philanthropic community. What is, what should be sustained? What should a good nonprofit be doing today?
Right. Yeah. It's that whole idea around, there are a lot of nonprofits that have, made the decision to operate in a level, in a space of entitlement. They've had the opportunity to do good work over the course of many decades in many cases. They are comfortable enough in their own skin. They are feeling pretty good about what they do. They have a powerful enough board. They have all the fixings to be the sustained organization. But ultimately, are they really the ones that are needed? Are they the ones that should be put up to the forefront?
Right.
And any nonprofit executive director, and I hear it a lot, that says things like, well, I'm just trying to work myself out of a job. And, I've actually heard nonprofit executives that have been at the wheel of the car for 20 plus years. And they've been saying for 20 plus years, I'm just trying to work myself out of a job. No, you're not trying to work yourself out of a job. You're just trying to sustain the operations of this organization that you're running. But yeah, the tough questions. And I actually question if a nonprofit organization is willing to ask themselves that question. I asked myself that question as leader of WPN. I asked myself that question, but I asked myself that question in a privileged place of comfort, because I recognize that we are needed, that there is a need for our type of organization in this space. And so I'm comfortable asking the question. That organization that isn't sure about their place and their space in the world may not be comfortable asking that question or be comfortable even addressing that with their board, because, well, if we have to be introspective about that, if we have to go through a strategic planning process about that, we may have to either change how we do business or stop telling the story that we tell about the effectiveness and need of our work within a given community.
Well, and I do think to some degree that circles back a bit to Salli, the point you were making about there's this need for action. I mean, part of it is when executive directors are asking themselves and asking their teams those questions and having good reflective conversations about it, then what? Because we have too many boards out there who aren't equipped to handle those conversations or to prompt those conversations or participate in them. And if they are, and if the executive team of the nonprofit is, that doesn't always mean that they're on the same page in terms of the relationships. Going back, Tony, to what you were talking about early on in the conversation, there's this certain comfort that we have to have in the relationship, but there's this shared leadership that is essential, in my opinion, for the true success of the sector and to be able to move things forward. And that shared leadership, as we're talking, I mean, I often talk about it as shared leadership between the staff and the board, but really it includes the philanthropists, it includes the funders as well, because without all three really understanding where the organization's coming from, what community need it's trying to address, what the scope of resources are that are out there in the community to do that, you're having a conversation in a vacuum.
Yeah, and that's you're absolutely right, Melanie. And I think one of the things that we have to look at is it's kind of a four-legged stool, in that we have to engage in a conversation with, and we have to bring to the table the people that are affected by the decisions that the nonprofit organization is making. We have to engage the constituents of the people that are being served by that nonprofit organization. It goes beyond kind of the management of that nonprofit organization to the board of directors of that organization to philanthropy. And really what it moves to, and you can find out about the viability, a nonprofit leader can find out about the viability of his or her organization in minutes if they decide that they want to talk to the right people and find out what their impact is in a given community, because that community will tell them what they want to hear. And a lot of nonprofit leaders are covering their ears and covering their mouth and covering their nose and saying, you know, we're just going to forge ahead, and we're just going to talk to our board, and we're just going to talk to our funders, and we're going to convince ourselves that the stories that we're telling are the right stories. But many of them are not. And I've had these conversations with nonprofit leaders. I've struggled and gone head to head with some nonprofit leaders because I've said, okay, you're telling a great story. You've got some great things that are happening. You've got children coming through your door. But what are the people? What are the adults in your neighborhood? What are the people that you're serving? What are they saying about your ease and ability to be able to have an impact? What level of dignity are you employing to the people that you're serving? Mm-hmm. How are you engaging them in the decision-making processes that you're making? And a lot of nonprofit organizations aren't particularly comfortable doing that. And that because what they're ultimately afraid of is that they're going to find out something that isn't in the story and the narrative that they're continuously telling their boards and their nonprofit organizations. I'm sorry, and their funders. The good news is for an organization like WPN is that we're talking to our members every day. You know, as a membership organization, we're predisposed to kind of hear the hard stories and get kicked around a little bit by our members and get a sense of what their real needs are and make an adjustment to that. But I couldn't tell you how I would be running an organization if I was actually going out and talking to constituents who weren't actually paying me the membership fees around what it is that I'm trying to do for that organization. So it becomes a really strange dynamic. But if nonprofit organizations want to get that full understanding about their sustainability, just go talk to the people that you're serving. They'll tell you what you need to know.
Part of the challenge with that, though, I mean, for some, I think it's harder than others to even be able to do that based upon the types of services that you're delivering or what that, communication or touch point is. But even when you, again, it's that question of you get that information, you get those insights, then what?
Then what? Yeah.
Like, then what do we do with it, particularly if it's something that we actually see this as the nonprofit staff or the leadership that, man alive, we have got to make change. We need to innovate here. We have the data that's showing us from our constituent perspective, from our staff perspective, that we need to do something differently. And if we say that out loud in an imperfect way, is that going to come back around and somehow actually cause us harm as opposed to helping us move forward?
I think it can be a positive experience if it is rooted in solutions. So there has to be, we're going to take this data, and this data absolutely stinks. Oh my God, what am I going to do with this stuff, right? And then be able to think about, okay, this is our process for distilling this information. This is our process for convening around what we could do next, and this is what we hope to achieve. I think is a greater and deeper and more meaningful opportunity when you're in that particular space. So there is a, and then organizations have to, nonprofit organizations have to really think like for-profit organizations and for-profit entities, and realize that, our favorite cereal in some cases may have changed their business model, or may have changed their recipe, or may have changed the way that they're presenting this to the people, to the consumer, and think about those different ways to be able to kind of recalibrate that and not get caught up in the, because of the greatest piece of innovation is that whole idea of the rationale, the research that comes with it, what we think we should do, and what we think we'll achieve out of that. That's a for-profit business model right there. And I think nonprofits need to adapt that and not just be so passive and say, oh my goodness, the world is circling around me. What do we do next? Or should we do anything next? And really the mindset should be, yeah, we should do things differently if that's what the market and that's what our constituents are calling for.
Oh, one of the things that I've been thinking about, and that I feel is missing in the sauce too of nonprofits as well as philanthropy, and when I say nonprofits too, I'm thinking of human service nonprofits in the most part, but is advocacy. So what we're also talking about is, how many nonprofits, serve individuals, which is, important. But I often wondered, instead of, and Melanie and I have had this conversation, instead of reporting to the board saying, we served this many kids last month and this is how many people we fed and so forth, which is important, don't get me wrong. But what if nonprofits also shift the conversation to talking about the importance of raising the minimum wage, the importance of doing things differently, the importance of healthcare for all, that if we suddenly stopped, if we just weren't focusing on feeding more, but also on changing that world for the people who we are serving, who are being served, is what could that also look like?
I like that idea, but I think, we kind of talked about innovation as having multiple definitions. I think advocacy kind of falls in the same space, that a lot of people don't understand what their potential is as an advocate for the people that they're serving, what their potential is as an advocate. There's that whole idea around, big A advocacy, little a advocacy, and God forbid lobbying, or the L word, or the lobbying piece. And then it comes down to, for a lot of organizations, the board of directors of those nonprofit organizations, and how comfortable they are with an organization hearing that an organization that they're serving on the board of directors is going to move into some kind of advocacy space. And what are the ramifications of that? What are the ramifications financially to that organization? What are the ramifications politically to that organization? Many nonprofits have boards of directors that are of varying political stripes. And so when they're sitting around a table and they hear what is the advocacy or the potential advocacy platform of said nonprofit organization, there are different opinions around walk away from that, just serve the children. Don't get involved in that, just serve the kids. I'm not here to watch you, change the world. I'm here to watch you serve these kids. And others that are sitting at the table going, yeah, let's go crack some heads. Let's make some signs. Let's head downtown. Let's go. So the nonprofit organization is going to have to balance that, but it gets right down to helping the board understand how that organization is defining their advocacy platform. Because there are parts of advocacy that everybody can get their head around. There's parts of advocacy that everybody can embrace. But the first initial hearing of that is a tough swallow, because there's a wonderment around, well, what does that mean? It's just as important for me to advocate for healthy opportunities for young people or families to be able to, or creating policy that is going to eliminate and delve down food insecurity for families. Just as important to me as voter registration. But voter registration is a hot issue. It took us a while as an organization. It took us a while as we moved down the road. Philanthropy nationally was looking at over 5 years ago, 5-6 years ago, we're looking at the 2020 census as an advocacy issue for everyone to get their heads around. And I don't know if it was lack of being able to explain it or turn the needle on that, but that was something that Philanthropy in Wisconsin didn't get their head around, didn't get their arms around. And it wasn't until we were able to build a rationale around the impact of not having people fill out the census, and how $1,600 to $2,000 per person in a community for everyone that doesn't fill out the census has a great impact on the community. And then when you add, well, if those people aren't filling out the census, then you're going to have gaps in communities for services. Well, who's going to be asked to fill the gaps of those services? Philanthropy. So let's get on the front end of this and promote the census and promote the importance of the census. But until people couldn't get out of their way and say, census, is that like voter registration, or is that an issue that I don't want to get involved in because there may be some pitfalls for us? That was one advocacy platform we were able to make build a rationale that got everybody interested and involved in saying, yeah, this is something that we should get involved in. Now, the next step of the census is going to be the redistricting piece, right? Maybe that's something we don't get involved in because there's larger political ramifications associated with that. It's a question to be kicked down the road, but it is something that we all have to kind of wrestle with as we're thinking about what our advocacy platforms are going to be.
But I think about, what you're saying, and that so many things popping off in my head right now. Is that one, I think the interesting component about the value of a board that's larger than 3 to 5 people is that, in fact, you do have the multiple perspectives in that room, all of whom, again, in theory, are united by the mission, by that desire for that nonprofit to serve the community need. And if in boardrooms across the state, you actually had groups of individuals with divergent political persuasions or others, at least coming to common ground and doing an upstream, downstream analysis of what are the policy issues that enhance, don't even go with impede if that's too challenging for people, but like what are those policy initiatives that are influencing our ability to move our mission forward effectively. Let's just list them. We're not even going to say we're going to take all of them on. Let's just map them and understand that they influence our resources and how we can move up this mission. And then maybe we'll pick one that we all can give it a thumbs up or at least a thumb sideways that says, we're willing to talk about this as an organization, as this collection of individuals, and just start small and get some aligned messaging that then people can kind of get comfortable with it. But you're also building this much more effective dynamic around what a board is actually supposed to do to benefit a nonprofit organization, which is to provide that community perspective and figure out how can we marshal more resources and bring more people to our cause. But I just think there's such opportunity. Well, but then for me, I think we should rethink governance and change the whole dynamic. And I mean, I've talked to a lot of people about that before. Give me a board of 3 to 5 people, have tons of advisory groups who can provide community perspective, like make sure board members know how to ask big questions, that they're comfortable in a room with the funder actually talking about the mission, little things like that. But then could funders do that same sort of mapping exercise that says these are our areas of interest and these are all of the things out there that are going to get in the way or make it move forward? And what an interesting dialogue that could be had to also see where the actual collaborations or cooperative arrangements could come in, because they're complementary. And you can see that so much clearer that they got to but I like to map things. Give me a bunch of data, let's map it out, then figure out what our message is.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Salli. Go ahead.
I was going to say, 2 things to that point is the fact that I would also not argue, but say the fact that we are nonprofits, if they are not doing some type of advocacy, to Melanie's point, even at that small level, and whatever advocacy looks like, are you really serving the people who you are saying that you serve? Is the fact that, because if you really do look at nonprofits, you think about the power of their voice together, the power of the sector, the power of boards together. I mean, there's a heck of a lot that we could be doing differently if we really accepted the power that we have. And we don't. I'm often amazed at presidential elections, gubernatorial elections, that not one nonprofit group will step forward and say, and what is your platform about nonprofits? What is your platform about X, Y, or Z? Never.
Never.
And you think of them as a voting block, and I just find it very interesting that doesn't happen.
Yeah, that you're right about that. That has never been a question that has been asked. I'll commit myself to asking that question as I go forward, because I think it's an important question, and People aren't asking that. I've never heard that question asked. Anyway. So I've asked people make the skip over the nonprofits and get down to specific issues in specific places at specific times. But yeah, what is the ability to be able to help nonprofit organizations and help those nonprofit organizations that are emerging? Because some of the big box organizations, they have the ability to be able to do that behind the scenes. They can utilize that powerful board in order to help them get to that place to be able to do that. But it's those emerging nonprofit organizations. What are candidates doing to help build the capacity for organizations that are doing good work that nobody necessarily knows about or is advocating for them on their behalf?
But it's interesting as I reflect upon you saying that, it makes me wonder so much of when I think about those emergent nonprofit organizations, or in many respects, a lot of the really innovative nonprofit leaders, they are the ones who are naturally advocating, and they, whether they're claiming it or not, that's across the board too. But I think they do that, and then my wonder is then you look at from the funder perspective, coming back on their willingness to be bold, to take those risks, to say the unpopular things that need to be said, and what dynamic is in play there, and how can there be that greater risk taking and comfort created for philanthropists and funders to support the emerging leaders and the emerging advocates in a way that is more, broader, or
yeah.
I'm kind of thinking out loud.
Well, there isn't a blanketed support approach across philanthropy around that space. That really comes down to the individual ability of any funding or philanthropic source to be able to support those types of built-in advocates that are in the community, those provocative advocates that are saying things that, the men and women that have no fear, the men and women that have no filter, if you went to each member of our 130 member a membership group of WPN and talk to each one of our leaders within our membership, there are going to be varying degrees of people that have a passion for supporting those types of outspoken advocates. Some would say, hands off, we're not messing with them. We're not going to deal with that organization. Others are saying, oh, I love that person. I love what they're doing. I love how they're doing their work, and we do support them. But it comes down to that individual that's sitting at that table making those decisions, or going to their charitable contributions committee and advocating themselves for those types of organizations. But there's a different weather report at every one of those funding organizations around their ability or digestibility to be able to support that type of leader.
It's also, I'm going to really quick, and hopefully, Salli, you can hold your thought because I always forget mine. It also occurs to me through this conversation as well that what opportunity there could be for funders and philanthropists to ensure that support for the array. I mean, in organizations that I've worked with, because we've talked about, in order to move the needle on this particular mission or this particular issue in our community, we need people who are working in the system and people who are working on the system and around the system. And, it takes a whole lot of approaches to make that work. And so it seems if you have a funder who is truly interested in affecting that community issue, the ability to provide that support, and it might look different for the different organizations, but to say, we're taking this on as the issue in the community, and we are ensuring that support, and we're going to bring these folks together, which is probably the hardest thing of all, bringing them together to say, you're all working on this issue for our community.
Right.
We're not saying you gotta, figure out how you're gonna hold hands and all that sort of, but you're all doing something to address this issue.
Yeah.
So to your point, because I was thinking about this yesterday, today, is we always talk about mergers, and I'm not suggesting a merger in this case, but but what responsibility also do some of the larger nonprofits have to support some of the smaller nonprofits? So sometimes, I'll just take a Boys and Girls Club wherever because they're always big, So what if there was a Boys and Girls Club that did see an advocacy group that they really, they liked their message, they liked what they were doing. And what would a partnership or something look like between those two organizations so that that advocacy group could, do what you're talking about, Melanie, support that message that the Boys and Girls Club wants to get out about X, Y, or Z, but they don't have the resources or the bandwidth, to do that. I don't know. It was just a crazy thought popping into my head about how people could work together differently.
The crazy, so not a crazy thought, Sally, but more of a reality associated with that. So the bigger nonprofits partnering with a smaller advocacy organization. I think about, the great work that Wisconsin Voices does, and how they are in some instances viewed as kind of these drum beaters, the kind of the crap starters, or, they're doing certain things within the community. I would love to be a fly on the wall in a conversation with the Boys and Girls Clubs of Greater Milwaukee and 76 baller types that are within the community that are sitting around that table the day that they're being told, oh, we're really thinking about what a real platform partnership would be with Wisconsin Voices. Because all 76 of those board members are going to have something to say about that, because they're thinking about the relationship they have with the board, the relationship they have with the nonprofit, but then the relationship they have with their organizations that they come from and represent as part of their board directorship. And where does an organization like the African American Roundtable, that's part of Wisconsin Voices, what is that going to mean for us? And many of those people around that table are going to opt out and say, we don't need to be going down this road because it might be too provocative for our organization. So, I think, Melanie, you described a process that makes a lot of sense. Void the politics of those conversations, like void the reality of the personalities, the politics, and other unforeseen issues I can't even think of off the top of my head that might impact a nonprofit's ability to be able to move down what real advocacy looks like. We're still operating in a very, very safe zone, a zone of comfort that allows people to do good work and feel good about what they're doing, but ultimately may not change the landscape and the course of a community over the long term within it. So I feel like I'm being a little bit of a Debbie Downer about Donnie Downer about this, but I think there's a reality that comes into play that we have to acknowledge that is standing in the way of some of the things that on surface make a lot of sense, but are just kind of, a good friend of mine once told me that the work that we're doing, the work that we do in neighborhood development, the work that we do of trying to make communities better, it's not hard work. It's not hard work. What we do isn't really hard work, but it's very, very, very difficult to get things done and get things accomplished. And I think that kind of falls into kind of the conversation that what we're talking about now is, intuitively, sure does make sense, easy to do, probably could get it done in a day, but then you got to deal with the reactions and the weigh-in and the political ramifications of what that potentially looks like.
It's true. And I think, what the conversation has surfaced in our final moments here this afternoon also is that, it always just seems so much easier than it really is once you add those human beings into it.
Yes. Yeah.
You can look at a system, you can look at a structure and process it.
At the end of the day, we are in the people business, and that is a challenging business to be in, is the people business.
And I think that's bearing out in this pandemic too. When it goes back to, we're in the people business. This is about relationships and seeing how can the new ways of making connections become part of our new norming.
Yes.
And so that it continues to be about connecting differently, thinking differently, trying some things, and being really clear about what you're in it for.
Right.
And did you get there? but we have to be able to pull back out of the day-to-day and that immediate reaction to think ahead and see what's out there. So in our final moments, Tony, will go to you and then to Salli. What would you like to share with the world right now about philanthropy community in the nonprofit sector?
I'd like to share that philanthropy is very engaged in what is happening with the pandemic right now. We're very engaged in thinking about solutions. We are engaging in great conversations a couple of times a week around a number of issues, around a number of approaches to the work. We should be inspired by that. We're not going to solve all the problems in the world. We're not going to make everybody happy. Not everyone is going to be funded to the levels that they feel like they should be funded. But I can assure you that philanthropy is engaged in spaces of discussion and actions that are contributing to the betterment of our community. And then the last thing I'd say is, we didn't really touch on, I would love to come back and have a deeper conversation about the equity piece that is associated within the philanthropic sector and nonprofits and what that potentially looks like, because that could be a part 2 and an hour-long conversation around the equity side of this work. So I would love to engage in further discussion about that if we could down the road.
I will take you up on that.
Okay.
Salli, what are your parting words?
Oh, and I don't want to be a Debbie Downer in this, but the one thing.
Realist. Just clear it up. It's called being a realist.
I will be a realist. One of the things I'm thinking about is you go on vacation and you come back to work, and that first couple of days, you're in that oh, I remember this, I remember that. And by the end of the week, the memories really start fading. And by week 2, you don't even remember you were on vacation. I hope that doesn't happen in this case. I really do. I hope that people remember the conversations about a new way of doing business, and that resounds over the long term and not just the short term. So that's where I sit on that, because I do think that nonprofits, in order to be long-term sustainable, need a different way of doing business. I really do.
I would agree with both of you. So Tony, we will have that conversation on equity. We'll get that scheduled, and we'll also, Salli, keep pushing forward on that constructive innovation and finding ways for organizations to rethink the sector and their approach. And everyone out there is invited to be part of that every day. You can start every day by thinking about what is one thing that you want to communicate, what is one thing that you want to do differently in your organization, and then check in at the end of the day or the week. How did you do? And keep that journal and keep that going, because that's part of true innovation. And so encourage everyone to find their way, find their footing as we're reacting in this new landscape. Keep focusing forward. We will move beyond business as usual. And in order to do that, you have many more opportunities. We will have other conversations such as this. Also, we have the Strategy Lab opening in June, and that's going to be an opportunity for nonprofits particularly to come together and actually deconstruct and reconstruct things of their choosing, like building better boards, figuring out different ways to do effective practical strategy, all of those sorts of things. And there's more information on all of that will be pieced out as appropriate at the timpanoconsulting.com website. So check that out. And my thanks to Tony, my thanks to Salli, my thanks to everyone who is out there watching live and or via recording. And go forward and continue to do good work. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Melanie.
Thanks, Melanie.